Hello, everyone. We're going to be thinking today about Luke chapter 7. And if you've got a Bible, you can take it and we're going to read it together. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was ill and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to him to say, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turned to the crowd following him. He said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As they approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier that they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." And this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. And this is God's holy and powerful word for us today. When I was young, I loved the Vikings. I actually loved the Vikings so much that I always wanted to be a Viking. One summer, our family was in England on holidays. Mum and Dad thought it'd be really fun for us to go to this Viking museum. So it's quite a famous one. It's in York, if you've ever been there. And it's an ancient Viking settlement that is being turned into a museum. So you can go and you can see the houses, you can see their tools. It sounded amazing. And we were all getting really excited about this. So we arrive at this museum, we join the queue to get in. But the strange thing was that some of the people who were in front of us were turned away and they were told the museum is shut. We were very disappointed. So we were just about to walk away when somebody tapped us on the shoulder and said, No, you guys are very welcome." We walk into the museum and people start handing us loads of really nice stuff. My dad is trying to buy the tickets, and they say to him, "For us, there's going to be no charge today." And then they all give us a glass of Schler, and we're given this goodie bag with some really nice Viking stuff in it. And then somebody from the newspaper comes along and says, "Oh, stand there, please. I just want to take your photo for a local article." Something inside me is questioning at this point and saying, "Yes, they have finally recognized me for my brilliance. This is what I've always deserved." But then somebody came over and explained it all. They said, "Well done, guys. Congratulations. You are our 15 millionth visitors." It was actually nothing to do with anything that we'd done. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time. A theme that comes up in this passage that we read in Luke 7 is the idea of deserving God's help. Imagine if you died in 1 minute from now. You meet God at the gates of heaven and he says, "Why should I let you in?" What do you say? You might be sitting thinking, "Well, I'm a pretty good person. I'm always at church. You should see how many rotas I'm on. And I've been reading my Bible for like 25 days in a row. Surely I deserve to get in for being such a nice guy. Or you might be sitting feeling very insecure. Actually, I don't know if I'm going to get in. You feel this constant low level sense of just not being good enough everywhere you go. Maybe you think, I don't deserve it. Maybe God will turn me away. This passage is going to show us that Jesus can give us a life that we couldn't earn. The great news is that being accepted by God isn't to do with performance. It's about who you trust in. Jesus has the authority to bring us in, and his compassion for us means that he was willing to do whatever it takes. So this passage, it's part of Luke's biography of Jesus, and Luke's been focusing on the way that Jesus cares particularly for poor people and people who are suffering. And he always shows us how Jesus keeps doing the unexpected and he keeps welcoming outsiders. So this first encounter, we're going to see how Jesus reacts to an outsider. So in verse 1, Jesus has been teaching about his authority to bring people into God's kingdom. And now that he's been teaching this, he's going to show us what this authority actually looks like. And he arrives in a town called Capernaum. In verse 2, we're introduced to a man who is a centurion. So this would be somebody who's pretty high up in the Roman army. He's very important. He's in charge of 100 men, and he's a bit like an army captain. But when you said the words Roman soldier to anybody from Israel, most people would have told you a story about how bad they all were. The Romans had colonized Israel. They'd taken over and they had installed their own leaders. And because of this, everybody hated the Romans because they made the Israelites pay tax to Rome. So we're sort of expecting this centurion to be a villain. It's a little bit like I was reading about the history of Bob Reagan recently, and 2020 is actually a very important year for the town. So today, that's the 20th of September, is the 100-year anniversary of the sack of Bob Reagan. So 100 years ago on this night, British police, they went on a rampage around Bob Reagan. They burned 50 houses and then they shot 2 local men. This town knows what oppression and injustice feels like. And to the extent that at the very heart of the town, there's this plaque on the bridge that says, Seamus Lawless and Sean Gibbons were brutally done to death by British forces on this night. This is in the heart of the town, and this hurt and distrust has been passed down through generations. In this story, a centurion is somebody who would have been involved in this kind of oppression, but it's against Jewish people this time. And yet he's the main character. But he's not what we expect him to be like. So we find out that he's got a servant who's very sick, and his servant is going to die if nothing happens. He's very attached to this servant, and he's so worried about him that he will do whatever it takes to help his servant. In verse 3, the soldier has heard of Jesus, and he really believes that Jesus can help him. So he sends some people to Jesus. But surprisingly, the people that he sends are Jewish elders. Why would they be helping him? How would a centurion be friends with a Jewish elder? So they come to Jesus in verse 4, and it says that they plead earnestly for Jesus to come. It turns out that this guy seems to be a good man. He loves the people of Israel, and he's even paid money towards building a local synagogue. So Jesus agrees to go to the man's house. And as he's starting to head there, another unexpected turn happens in this story. Even more people are sent to Jesus with another message from this man. And they tell Jesus that the man says, actually, don't come, Jesus. I don't deserve to even have you under my roof. But I know that you have the power to heal my servant. So just say the word. This man has never met Jesus, but he's certain that Jesus just needs to speak and his servant will be healed. The stakes are pretty high here. This servant is going to die if this doesn't work. But this centurion has two things which are really special. He totally believes in Jesus' power. He says, Jesus, say the word, and he's going to be healed. And yet, he also knows that he's not worthy. He says, I don't deserve to have you under my roof. So, in other words, he's got a big view of Jesus and a small view of himself. This man has got everything. He's powerful, he's important, and he's rich. He gives orders, and 100 people will do what he says. He's got a really nice house. He's got loads of money to have servants. And yet he doesn't feel worthy for Jesus to come into his house. This is the only time in the Bible where Jesus is amazed at somebody's faith. And it's huge that Jesus says that he's never found faith like this in all of Israel. Israel should have been the place where it was easy to find this kind of faith. The people of Israel were God's chosen people in the Old Testament, and they've been getting prophecies from God for thousands of years. They've been getting messages. They've got the scriptures where God's word is recorded. Everyone would have been at the synagogue every week. They had literally everything they needed to know God. And yet a complete outsider understands who Jesus is better. Imagine if you've been coming to church for years. You're on every rota. Your friends are always saying that you're so good for being involved in church. And then a local drug dealer comes in and sits down in church, acknowledges that he needs forgiveness from God, and the minister says that he has more faith than you. You would be raging. When the people arrive home, they find the servant completely healed. And it's funny that in this story, we never meet the main character. We only hear messages about him through what he sends, but we get a pretty good idea of what he's like. He's got this simple trust that impresses Jesus. It's nothing that he's done himself. And there's a huge application for us in this story. Basically, faith is having a small view of ourselves and a big view of Jesus. That's what faith is. When I was young, I thought that being a Christian was all about doing things. My mum and dad were Christians, and I saw them going to church every week, and I saw them, they read their Bibles, they always said please and thank you, they paid their taxes. So I just thought that's what being a Christian's all about. But I would feel guilty all the time that I wasn't doing enough. I'd be trying to be a good person, but I'd be wondering, am I really on track with God? If I stopped reading the Bible for a few days, or if I fell back into some sin that I kept doing, I start to question that if I was even a Christian at all. But this isn't how it works. The good stuff that this man has done doesn't get him in with Jesus. In fact, Jesus is amazed by the small view of himself that he has. Following Jesus starts with realizing that you don't deserve to be with him. You don't deserve for him to be involved in your life. I was chatting to somebody recently about how there's this thing that can happen to people who start coming to church, and they'll get all excited about being part of this new family. It's all really new and exciting. And then something happens inside their heads, and they'll start to think, you're not really good enough to be here. And they'll drop away because they don't know as many fancy religious words. They kind of feel a bit messy. Their lives are messy compared to some of those nice and tidy Christians around the place. Maybe they don't have the right Bible verses to hand to put on a WhatsApp group. But this isn't what Jesus wants. Jesus wants you to be sure that he's powerful enough to make you good enough. So in the second section, we're going to be thinking about this story where Jesus meets this widow. So he goes to a town called Nain in verse 11. It's about a day's walk from Capernaum. And in verse 12, he comes to the gate with his followers, but something really sad has happened. There's this big funeral going on, and a dead body is being carried out. In Jewish culture, they bury people on the same day that they die. So this was very raw for everyone here. It's a local tragedy. Instead of a hearse, the Jews would bring out the body wrapped up on a plank of wood, and everybody would follow behind. And then following behind this dead body, we meet the mother of the man who's died, and she's also a widow. Her husband has died, and now she's also lost her only son. And this poor woman is completely alone. Her family line is over. She's got no hope, no future. And it's also an incredibly bad situation for her to be in, because there was no way for her to make a living for herself after this. And then Jesus steps in. You might have gone through times in your life where you wonder, why does God let bad things happen to me? It's a huge question to ask. But at the very least, this passage shows us that Jesus cares about our pain. In verse 13 he says, when he saw her, his heart went out to her. Christianity is all about how much God cares. The symbol of Christianity is the cross. It's a type of execution. This is how much God cares for us, that he was willing to be killed. And if you're following the way of Jesus, then you'll also care about people's pain. So what are you doing to help people who are suffering, even in our own church family? Is there a way that you could comfort someone who's been going through a hard time? It could be something practical, like making them a pot of stew, or just checking in with them on the phone. Jesus goes over to this woman and he says, don't cry. And that kind of seems a bit insensitive to say to somebody who's just lost their only son, unless Jesus can change this situation. And Jesus goes over to the bier and touches it. And in doing that, everybody would have noticed that, because for a Jewish person to touch a dead body, they're making themselves unclean. Yet Jesus doesn't worry about this. He says to the dead body, young man, get up. And the man's brought to life again. This woman's life was ruined and remade all on the same day. Her tears didn't even have time to dry. Jesus has taken her pain and he's made her family whole again. So we've seen that Jesus cares about us, and we're also going to see how Jesus has total authority, and that's even over death. All of us were searching for some real authority, especially right now. And I found that I'm obsessively flicking onto the news all the time to just find out what new rule I have to follow. I'm just looking for somebody who knows what's going on. We're not allowed to meet in church, so we're back on Zoom again. And it seems that nobody really knows how to fix this. Jesus has total authority over disease and death. When Jesus speaks, people come back to life. And in this story, the miracle isn't actually the main thing. It's actually what we learn about Jesus. Look at his compassion for this woman, and look at his authority that he has over death. These miracles are a picture of what Jesus ultimately came to do. It's okay to desperately want healing now, but you don't need to wait until the next life to experience the healing of the cross. A more complete healing is coming. COVID-19 is everywhere, and it seems impossible to be safe. Staying safe is just unlikely now. But this passage shows us that Jesus is more powerful. The centurion's servant and the widow's son, these two people are both dead now, even though they were healed. This was just the healing of their earthly body. But in healing their bodies, Jesus points to a more complete and permanent healing that he's capable of. And the way that he brings about this healing for us is through his death on the cross. So I just want to finish with this. We're like the man on the plank, and we're a little bit like the woman, because without Jesus, we're spiritually dead like the man. We're hopeless without Jesus, just like the woman. But Jesus has brought us to life in him and given us a new family. A follower of Jesus has had this incredible reversal that's taken place in their life. Our resurrection and new life in Jesus is just every bit as dramatic as the resurrection of the widow's son. We're literally given a new heart. And maybe you feel discouraged at times and you think, my faith doesn't really make much difference to my life. Is being a Christian even that big a deal? But these miracles help us to understand the sort of work that Jesus does in our lives. It's like when I was 15, I heard the gospel in a new way, and it just clicked with me for the first time. I accepted Jesus as my Lord. But then I had to go to school again the next day, and nobody really noticed anything different. But this passage encourages us to trust in the internal change that happens in our souls. So going back to that question I asked at the start, when God says, "Why should I let you in?" What do you say to God? Now that we know what faith is like, it's not something you can earn. It's trusting in Jesus and that he has all of the authority and compassion. And when you experience this, it frees us up to have compassion for other people too. We can be totally free to admit that we can't earn it. So my prayer for us as a church is that we have a small view of ourselves and a big view of Jesus. Let's pray together. Father, thank you that you have total authority over everything and that you care for us. Help us to have a bigger view of Jesus and a smaller view of ourselves. Let us be willing to share your compassion with everyone we meet in the same way that we've received this gift that we couldn't earn. Amen.